Ladies and gentlemen, fellas, what's going on? How you doing? Football is about to be here. I cannot wait. And maybe you're about to troll me because you're seeing this in the future in a week or two. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, nothing's going to happen. But as of right now, as I'm recording this, towards about the second to third week of August, on August 18th right now, we have football coming up in about 3 weeks. And I want to let you know the number one draft strategy that I personally am using. If you disagree with this, if you have your own strategy that works for you, that's fantastic. I'm open to discussing those in the comment section or on Twitter at SalVetri below, or in the Discord, totally free, link down below. But I'm going to be going over the one that I've done. I've done somewhere probably between 50 and 100 mock drafts. In terms of paid drafts where I have money in them and I actually are live for this year as of right now, again, knock on wood, I'm probably somewhere around 50 of those as well, between Underdog, between drafters, maybe even a little bit more from some of the mock drafts that we did with some of the Discord people that were like $1 or $2 buy-in. But I'm on Underdog, I'm on drafters, I'm going to be on even more sites after that. I have dynasty leagues that I have to keep up with and all that stuff. So I've done a decent amount for redraft purposes between mocks and actually paid for over 100 drafts so far. And I've tried all the different approaches. We've tried some of them in these videos. You can check out all the playlists on fantasy football playlists for 2020 on this channel. Also, while you're here, like button, take a second of your time. Big old subscribe. And if this is your first time viewing me, it's great to see you. I really do appreciate you. Those likes and subscribes really do fuel this channel. It's probably the reason that you actually are watching this video right now, because somebody else did it. So please do pay it forward. Totally free to do so. It takes 2 seconds of your time. But what I want to come in today and do is pretty much just discuss this strategy. And I have right now the ADP behind me on fantasydata.com. I appreciate fantasy data. I appreciate what they do in different sports as well. So we're going to just look at their ADP. And on my other screen over here, I have my rankings. I have my projections, my rankings, my top 150s. All that stuff is on the Supreme Draft Guide. If you have not yet purchased the draft guide, or you don't have rankings or things that you trust, I do have a draft guide linked down below. A lot of people have already purchased it. We have a bunch of people saying positive things about it. Not only is it player profiles, top 150s, key stats, bunch of stuff, right? Rankings, tiers, all these things that, especially on draft night, when you are on the clock and the guys that you were wanting to pick, the 2 guys you had looked at are gone, and you got 2 minutes to make a choice. This draft guide, the Supreme Draft Guide, is there to help you with those decisions. And again, thanks to Monkey Knife Fight, really, it's going to be only $10. Link down below if you use the promo code SALNFL. If you just click the link in the description, it'll take you to a landing page that'll discuss it. But that's all linked down below. Appreciate you all being here. You can check all that out on your own time. But I'm just going to go down through the ADP. We're going to assume that it's a 12-person draft, right? That seems standard now. 10 to 12 teams, whatever it might be. But I just want to go through a couple of rules that I have written down in my notes over here, and just what I am going to tell you and what I'm going to bring to you as kind of the number one strategy that I have been using for this specific year. It changes every year. If you're slapping last year's strategy onto this year, or 3 years ago strategies onto this year, and you're not adding in any other context of what's happening in the league, whether it's the running back position is becoming more running back by committee centric, wide receivers are becoming deeper and teams are going spread offense more, using more play action, things like this. If you're not using this and implementing it, the league rules are changing the way that the offenses can actually score points, and they're going downfield more, and they're using running backs who are pass catching running backs and not necessarily just grinding running backs up the middle of the field, right? Those types of things. Rookies are getting more chances at the wide receiver position than ever before because they're coming out just ready. All these things you have to take into account. You can't be using the same strategies as 3 or 4 years ago. It's just disgusting to see people and analysts, the worst analysts in fantasy football, recommending strategies specifically because they worked 3 or 4 years ago. If they work this year still, that's fine. Just add the context to it. That's all I want to hear from people. And that's what I'm going to be doing for you today. So what we're going to be doing is just starting it off right now. Now let's assume that we're just drafting like towards the middle or end of the first round. Again, if you're drafting first or second overall, you know you're taking probably McCaffrey or Saquon. If you have a really strong Eckling or a really strong feeling for Kamara or Dalvin Cook or Zeke and you want to take them second, that's fine. But for the most part, McCaffrey, Barkley, I then have Zeke and Kamara in that order in my top 150 in my overall PPR rankings. But we can just go through this. So what I'm doing in the first round, and right now in my main and my home league, I have to draft 4th overall. So I'm looking at taking Kamara. If Kamara goes before Zeke, then I'll just take Zeke at 4. I might think about Dalvin Cook, but probably not going to too much. But what I want to do, my first rule in terms of what this strategy is I really want to go running back start. That's just important to me at all extremes. Now, if you're drafting 1st overall and you get McCaffrey, well then obviously when you come back around at this 24 and 25 pick turn, you can just go wide receiver, then running back, because you get to get both picks, right? You don't have to technically fall in line there. But let's just say that you're somewhere around this 10th pick, right? And we're at the 10th pick right now, and based on ADP, what you're normally going to see there is a guy in Miles Sanders being there. And that's pretty interesting. Miles Sanders is my 11th overall player, so it makes sense. But you'll have guys like Miles Sanders, Joe Mixon, Josh Jacobs. All these guys will be down in this range. I'm snagging one of these running backs. Now, if I'm in this range, I'm taking Joe Mixon over Miles Sanders. I'm taking him over Josh Jacobs. That's just me personally based on my rankings. So let's just say that you snag your guy in Joe Mixon here, and now you're back around on the clock at the 14th pick overall, and now you're in this range. Now, obviously, players can drop. Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs, these types of players can drop. So if Miles Sanders drops, my strategy for starting it, the one that I've been using, my number one strategy for 2020 fantasy football, snag your first running back. In this situation, based on ADP, a lot of the time if I'm drafting at like the 6 through honestly like 10 spot, if Joe Mixon is there, I'm taking him. And then in the second round, if anybody drops between a Miles Sanders, if for some reason a Clyde Edwards-Helaire drops, if any of those types of players drop, I'll take them. But I will prefer Nick Chubb over right now Josh Jacobs. I will prefer Nick Chubb right now over Kenyon Drake just slightly. So if Nick Chubb's here, where the ADP is kind of saying that right now, he's down at 16th overall. My first pick was Joe Mixon right here at the 10th spot. Then you come back around, let's just say I get Nick Chubb. I feel really good about a start of Joe Mixon and Nick Chubb. If it's Miles Sanders and Nick Chubb, whatever it might be, I feel good about that start. The whole point of this is just to say, get back-to-back running backs with your first two picks. It doesn't matter if you're picking 6th over here and Zeke drops to you like the ADP is showing right now up here. It doesn't matter if that's the case in my opinion, or if you're picking all the way down at 12th overall and you want to snag a Mixon and a Kenyon Drake back-to-back, or a Miles Sanders and a Nick Chubb back-to-back. I'm fine with that. My rule, though, is that I just really do want to get two running backs back-to-back. Makes a huge difference later on. And we'll talk about why, but pretty much the biggest reason why is because in the later rounds, let's say there's 18 rounds in your draft, in rounds, honestly, like 12 through 18, the wide receivers there are going to be good wide receivers. I mean, let me just list off a couple of the wide receivers that are going to be in that range for the most part, like 10 through 18. I mean, Deshaun Jackson, Randall Cobb, who is a starting wide receiver that just got a big salary, as much as you want to say, and he's not even 30 yet. He's about to turn 30, but he's not even 30 yet, so people think he's an old man. Anthony Miller, Preston Williams, N'Keal Harry, right? Michael Pittman, all the rookies in Laviska Shenault, Denzel Mims, Alan Lazard, the number 2 wide receiver for the Packers. Even if they're going to run more this year, being attached to Aaron Rodgers as number 2, when Devontae Adams is going to take away a lot of coverage from you, and they're probably going to use a lot of play action, seems like a pretty good get in the double-digit rounds. You want to know the running backs that you pretty much have to burn and light your pick on fire in that point are, now guys like Chase Edmonds will be there, and those are good options, but the good options quickly fall out. I think Tony Pollard's even a little bit overrated, but Tony Pollard, Chase Edmonds, these guys quickly start to melt down, and you start to get left with Justin Jackson, Raquel Armstrong, Naeem Hines, right? These types of players, Malcolm Brown, Giovanni Bernard. I don't want to be taking those guys, even if it is the 13th or 14th round, but I could literally be taking a guy like Deshaun Jackson, or start loading up on the Laviska Shenault rookies, or guys who are at least going to be solid for PPR-wise, 10 fantasy points a week or so, 8 to 10 to 12, and Randall Cobbs and Hunter Renfrows and those types of players. Rather be taking those guys and loading up on the upside of the rookies or the younger players that actually are on the field. Wide receiver 3s are actually used on the field these days in these spread offenses, where backup running backs for the most part are not. Even if backup running backs, even if guys get hurt, Giovanni Bernard and Malcolm Brown are still dealing with competition. So even if the main running back gets hurt there, those types of guys are still going to be in a committee. If it's Giovanni Bernard with Trevion Williams, or Rodney Anderson if he's finally healthy. If it's Malcolm Brown with Darrell Henderson Jr., or John Kelly if he still stays on this team. He seems like he's always been on this team with the Los Angeles Rams. So that's my second tip overall pretty much, is that the depth at wide receiver in those double-digit rounds is just way better. I mean, there's times where you can get into double-digit rounds. Anthony Miller, Preston Williams. You can get McCole Hardman sometimes in those rounds. High upside rookies in the wide receiver position, whereas with the running backs, you're getting dust. You're getting backups that at best, even if they play, are still bad running backs. So I personally just don't want to be dealing with that. My next piece of advice is that I usually like to get because there's not a lot of depth in those double-digit rounds, there's a couple of one-offs that I do like, really late guys that I do like a Jerick McKinnon this year, the guys in like the double-digit rounds that I like Chase Edmonds, guys who actually have some upside to maybe have standalone value, Zach Moss, although he's not going into the double-digit rounds right now, but I do like getting about 3 running backs. Ideally, in my first 4 picks, like my perfect start would be 2 running backs like we just did. Say a Miles Sanders and a Nick Chubb if you're able to do that based on where you're drafting this year, or even if it's a Zeke and then you come back around and you're snagging like an Eckler, right? Those types of things, or a Zeke and an Aaron Jones. I feel good about that as well. When your third pick comes back around and now you're on the clock in this range, you can start hunting wide receivers. And honestly, you can go with another running back, or you can hunt the Kenny Galladay. Kenny Galladay drops here sometimes. Allen Robinson a lot of the times will drop to your third pick. That's a stud wide receiver. For me, those are top 8 wide receivers in my rankings right now. I like those guys. So if you want to snag your first stud wide receiver there, that's fine. But then with that 4th pick, I normally come back around and grab myself a running back. So whether that means it's a Leonard Fournette, who I am personally high on, it seems like he's one of the most polarizing players this year. I'm personally high on him. If it's a Melvin Gordon, if it's a Chris Carson, if it's a David Johnson, one of those types of running backs, if you want to take an upside shot with the rookie Jonathan Taylor in this range, that's typically how I like to start my overall lineups. I like to get 3 running backs in my first 4 picks. I have no issue going 3 running backs in a row if the board is letting me do so. But if you do want to take a stud receiver because a Galladay or an Allen Robinson is there, I'm completely fine with that. I've done that some of the time. Some of the times I take 3 in a row, but that's kind of what I want to do. 3 running backs in your first 5 picks seems like something that you really want to be doing if the board is lending itself that way, especially how I've been doing it, 3 running backs in my first 4 picks, because then you start with a start a lot of the times, and I've done this a decent amount, where let's just say you have a Joe Mixon, you have a Nick Chubb, and now you have an Allen Robinson. Those are 2 stud running backs in my opinion that are both going to push for 300 plus carries on the ground, and then you get a wide receiver last year who, not even just saying that last year is going to become this year, but I think the quarterback situation can be a little bit better, the defense gets a little bit worse, means they throw a little bit more, and Allen Robinson for a 140 plus target season or somewhere around there. And then you come back around and maybe you land Leonard Fournette, who is going to be another guy for a 300 plus touch season, whatever it might be down in that range. So that's the start that I like. 2 running backs. or maybe 3 in a row, but 2 running backs, a stud receiver, and then a running back with your 4th pick, something along those lines is what I'm liking to see. Because then what I do in my final picks or my picks after that is you start to become your 5th and 6th pick, right? And now you're living in this range in like this 46 range or like the 48 to 50 range where your pick next comes up. And this is where I really like these wide receivers in this range. So you can start to see this is where that 5th and 6th round pick would be if we're going over like drafting later in the 1st round, and then you go from there. Basically what I like to do here is you start to get these 2nd-year wide receivers popping up who were all fantastic last year because they're coming out of college better than ever with the technology, the coaching, just everything, all the tape and all the technology they're able to use to not only prepare their bodies, but also their mindset, their education, their knowledge of the game. And they're coming out looking like A.J. Brown, a mini Julio Jones, right? They're coming out being as dominant as Terry McLaurin and DK Metcalf and Debo, although now he's going to be hurt. And those types of players in the first year. Hollywood Brown with a bum ankle all season long, right? These types of things, these are the players that are here. So now you're sitting there, if you're following this strategy with 3 running backs, you're kind of secure at running back. I would like to get 1 or 2 more guys in my draft, depending on how many rounds it is. If it's 22 rounds, well, then get yourself 6 running backs, right? But if it's only 16 to 18 rounds, I'm fine leaving a draft if I have 4 good ones. 5 if you want to add an extra one later on, that's fine. If somebody falls to you, like if a DeAndre Swift or a Cam Akers, one of these rookies with upside is still there, I'll typically take them with my 5th or 6th pick, depending on how many picks are left on the clock. Like Swift, if he's not going to be taken for another round and I could snag him 4 picks later or 6 picks later, I'll take Swift with my 6th pick. But a lot of these times in this range, depending on who's left on the clock, if a Robert Woods falls, I'm snagging that. But a lot of the times the 2nd-year wide receivers or some of the younger 3rd-year wide receivers are still on the clock. I'm talking A.J. Brown, I'm talking Terry McLaurin, I'm talking DJ Shark, right? These types of guys that I really like this year. DK Metcalf to an extent. Hollywood Brown usually goes a little bit later, but to an extent. Those are the names that I'm looking for in the 5th and 6th round. I'm okay doubling up on wide receiver. If I get an A.J. Brown and a Terry McLaurin, and now I have 3 running backs, 3 stud running backs, or at least really strong running backs with strong workloads and ideally pass-catching abilities, and then 3 receivers, one being a stud and an Allen Robinson or a Kenny Golladay in that 3rd round, and then getting 2 younger guys who already broke out last year and are now coming into situations in their 2nd year with not a lot of target competition. In A.J. Brown and his offense, like Jonnu Smith's probably the best target competition, and I like him a lot too, but that's not saying much. For Terry McLaurin, all his target competition is pretty much Steve Sims, right? Harmon got hurt. They cut Darius Geis. Antonio Gibson is a rookie. You can say all you want about him, but if he's catching 4 passes a game out of the backfield, that's very good for him. That's actually really good for a rookie running back, but I don't think that impacts Terry McLaurin's downfield upside all that much. So now you're in a situation where you're starting out, if we just recap this a little bit, and of course it all depends on where you're drafting. So if you're at the top, all the way at the top, and you're watching this and you're getting a McCaffrey or Saquon, maybe it comes back around and you snag yourself a Leonard Fournette, or Aaron Jones is still there and a Leonard Fournette, or you get Aaron Jones and you pile it up with a Kenny Golladay, and that's your start. Or if you're at the end of the draft and you're getting a Joe Mixon and a Miles Sanders, Joe Mixon and a Nick Chubb, then you're getting the turn that we're talking about, then you get an Allen Robinson, right? That's your 3rd pick. Your 4th pick is a Leonard Fournette or a Chris Carson, or whatever every running back you like in that span. That's just how I'm doing it, at least. And then your 5th and 6th pick, most of the time in this range, I want one of those young stud wide receivers, because again, wide receiver is so deep in the middle and even late rounds, of course. So one of those young stud wide receivers. Ideally, I like A.J. Brown the most right now in my rankings, but I'm fine getting to a Terry McLaurin. Those are the 2 guys I'm really looking for. After that, a DJ Shark. Those types of guys are the ones that I'm really trying to get in that round with my 5th pick. If you want to double up on them if they're there, that's fine. My 6th pick, I'll usually take one of those rookie running backs, secure my 4th running back, and feel good about it. I think DeAndre Swift has a ton of upside. I think Cam Akers has a ton of upside. And that's pretty much how my first 6 picks start. If I can have 4 running backs locked up and I really don't have to take another one, maybe like a last pick in the draft, Jerick McKinnon or one of those types of deals, or like a 12th pick, Chase Edmonds, 11th pick, right? Something like that. Pretty much if I can lock those up by round 6, I've got my 2 wide receivers. What I'm doing now for my 7th and 8th pick, and sometimes 9th pick, is just loading up on wide receivers in those mid-ranges. I'm talking the mid-range wide receivers where you can snag still guys who have a ton of upside, whether it's Will Fuller, Brandon Cooks, Michael Gallup. These types of guys who are either number 1s on their team, we'll see between Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks who can take that throne in Houston, or Michael Gallup, who his head coach Mike McCarthy just said he's a number 1 wide receiver, but he plays with Amari Cooper, so he's basically not. But last year he was the number 1 wide receiver. Injuries dealt into it a little bit in that Dallas offense, so I want to snag those types of guys. Sometimes Jarvis Landry falls this far, although not often. Tyler Boyd, another number 2 in his offense. Deontay Johnson, another number 2, right? These types of guys is where you can load up. You can snag 2 or 3 of these players in round 7, 8, or 9. You want to know the running backs that are on the board in these rounds? Jordan Howard, gross. Tevin Coleman, gross. I don't want to be drafting that. Tariq Cohen, meh. Phillip Lindsay, meh. Latavius Murray, unless Kamara gets hurt, very, very bad of a pick. I don't want those guys compared to Will Fuller, who even if he's hurt for 5 games, even if he plays 11 games, is going to outproduce those running backs all day long, unless their starting running back gets hurt, right? So that's what I'm doing. So now we're like 8 to 9 rounds into this. I'm loading up in those first 6 picks, ideally with 4 running backs if they're good. I'm not forcing it. If all the good running backs are taken and people are taking running backs heavy and are trying the approach I'm doing, well then fine, get some of those stud wide receivers in that 5th and 6th round instead. But I really want 3 running backs in my first 5 picks. Ideally, I'm doing it in my first 4, and then I'm getting 2 wide receivers, 4 running backs to start my draft. I have not mentioned tight end. I have not mentioned quarterback because I'd like to get late round quarterbacks and late round tight ends. In my opinion, you're playing a losing game unless you're in a super flex or some type of dynasty league. If you're taking a QB early, I don't even care if it's Lamar or Patrick Mahomes. I don't want them in the second round. Maybe in best ball type formats if you're trying to stack. Even then, I'm not too high on it. If we're talking about a league where you're trying to beat literally 9 or 11 other people, depending on how big your league is, I don't want an early round quarterback. Early round tight ends are usually you paying a premium for guys who were good last year. I mean, let's just look at that, right? It's been for the last couple of years, guys like Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, who was good last year, you're now paying a premium. Darren Waller, who was good last year, you're now paying a premium. So why not just discover those guys who are going to be good this year and then not pay for them next year, but pay for them this year and then keep doing the cycle? There's so many good late round tight ends. So now if you've been following this method, you take a bunch of wide receivers in those 7 through 9 rounds, you're now in round 10. And this is where I'm finding to start taking a quarterback, right? In round 10, we pretty much start that round off at pick like 120 or so. So if I load more of these down here, you're pretty much in this range right here where you can start taking a Matthew Stafford. I feel really good about Matthew Stafford. He's a top 10 quarterback for me right now. Cam Newton you can take down here in this range. So round 10, 11, and 12 is where I'm starting to snag my first quarterback and my first tight end. I like the late round tight ends. There's so many. I mean, right now I have Jonnu Smith as a tight end 1. He's in my top 12. You got guys right outside of that. Mike Gesicki's in my top 10 tight ends right now. He's 10th overall. You got guys like TJ Hawkinson, Noah Fant. So many guys in this range. Ian Thomas is there later on as a tight end 2 you can get with huge upside. Same things can be said for Chris Herndon and Blake Jarwin. So in this range, I'm coming out here with the 10th pick. Depending on if guys have already taken quarterbacks or not, if I think that the quarterback is pretty thin, I'll go ahead and get a Matthew Stafford, a Cam Newton, a Carson Wentz. That's normally where I'm landing at quarterback at this point. Sometimes if Matt Ryan falls, I'll get him. But normally my quarterbacks in these drafts that I'm doing are Matthew Stafford, a Carson Wentz, a Matt Ryan, or a Cam Newton. I'm very high on Cam Newton. He's my 11th overall quarterback right now. But I think that's a pretty good spot to be going. And then in the 11th round, depending on how good the tight end value is on the board, so if we come over here and we start to see some tight end value start to go, that's where I'll start to snag a Mike Gesicki. I'll start to snag a Jonnu Smith or the guys that I like, TJ Hawkinson. And my goal is to have, depending on how many rounds in your draft, if you're drafting a 22-round draft, I'd like to get 3 tight ends, 3 stud younger tight ends. If you're drafting 16 to 18 rounds, I think 2 younger tight ends is good. Wait later on, just snag 2 of them that both have high upside. Hope one of them hits. If they both hit and you can just throw one into the flex some weeks or use them as trade bait, even better. So now let's say we're about 12 rounds through this draft. So 10 and 11 or 12, somewhere in there. I'm taking 1 tight end and 1 quarterback. So now we're in like round 12 of your draft, right? And pretty much at this point, you have your 4 running backs. You've got yourself about 5 wide receivers if you took a bunch in those middle rounds from 7 to 9, a tight end and a quarterback. So it depends how many rounds are in your draft. Let's just say on average there's 16 rounds in your draft. So you got 5 picks left now. I'm probably spending one of those picks since I have some secure running back value on a running back. I'm probably spending one of those picks on a backup quarterback and a backup tight end, and the final 2 picks are going back to the wide receiver well. So I'm going to leave this draft with like 7 wide receivers, 5 running backs, 2 tight ends, and 2 quarterbacks. And at this point, you just have to see what's left on the board. But down in these rounds is where you have the Deshaun Jacksons of the world, guys who are a number 1 wide receiver, who they're saying still looks very fast, who every time we've seen him, which has not been much over the last 2 years, still looks fine and gets past defensive backs in week 1, and then he gets hurt, so fingers crossed it doesn't happen this year. Anthony Miller, who was the best wide receiver on the Bears last year, the final 6 weeks of the year. Not Allen Robinson, Anthony Miller, most efficient and most productive receiver on that team last year. This is where I want to be piling up on even more wide receivers that have upside. Literally, potentially the number 1 receiver on the Eagles in a good offense with a good offensive line and quarterback. A top 12 quarterback for me in fantasy, Deshaun Jackson in these types of rounds. Anthony Miller, a number 2 who showed upside to be a number 1 many weeks last year, has upside in these rounds. You want to know what you're getting at the running back position? LaShawn McCoy. You're getting guys like LaShawn McCoy down in this range. You're just getting 3rd string running backs at points. DeAndre Washington. I understand these guys have some upside, right? Bryce Love. These are not the types of guys. Nyheim Hines, like we talked about earlier. I don't want these guys. Get my studs earlier on, and then I can load up on the talented wide receivers and tight ends in this range. So my goal is to probably snag 2 of these wide receivers with my 12th and 13th pick, and that's where you start to get your Allen Lazards, right? Your Deshaun Jacksons, these types of guys. If you want to start taking rookies like Brandon Ayuk and Michael Pittman, I'm completely fine with that. Those are the guys, Preston Williams, Anthony Miller. So now that's like rounds 12 and 13. Round 14 comes around and I start to look at what's on the board for tight end still. If there's a lot of depth still there, I don't take one. If there's not, maybe I take one. And in those rounds, I'm fine to take if a TJ Hawkinson is dropped or an Ian Thomas is there or Chris Herndon is there. It really depends on what's on the board. A lot of times Jonnu Smith will drop and I'll have my tight ends being Mike Gesicki and Jonnu Smith. Gesicki looks even better now. That Miami has lost Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson. They're opting out of the season due to COVID. So you have Jakeem Grant still there, but it looks even better for Gesicki, who ran the most route percentage out of the slot last year for tight ends. That looks really good now, even with teammate Preston Williams returning. So that's normally around 14 or 15 where I'll draft my backup tight end, get 2 of those younger upside type players. And then after that, in rounds 15, 16, if that's how many rounds are in your draft, Maybe you go with a backup quarterback. You add another running back if you want. At that point, leaving it with like a Jerick McKinnon at this far in the draft is fine. You'll still have very good receivers on the board. In that 16th round, I mean, you're still going to have opportunities to draft like some rookies, Denzel Mims, Michael Pittman, N'Keal Harry, Randall Cobb. Those types of names will still be on the board. Rashad Perriman, Mike Williams, all these guys. So ideally, if you're watching this, another tip is tell your league mates to have an 18 to 20 to 22 overall round draft. Because if you can just be loading up on these types of players, Rashad Perriman is like your wide receiver 8. You can get Jerick McKinnon as like your running back 6. These types of things, you're building a very good depth chart that you don't even have to worry about waivers, right? When people are going to the waivers to try and get a guy, you already got him on your bench because you're so good at drafting, watching these videos and all that type of stuff. But that's where I'm at. I think your QB2 you can just get later on. You can still get guys like Kirk Cousins as a QB2 later in the draft. Jimmy Garoppolo is somebody I'm higher on, comes later in the draft. But those are mainly the big tips. The ones that we talked about today, right? Getting running backs early, getting a couple of them earlier on is probably a big thing that I really want to be doing in a lot of my drafts at this point. 3 of my first 4 picks is what I'm usually doing. Load up on some of the middle round wide receivers, get my tight ends and quarterbacks later on, and then load up on even more later round wide receivers because we already took care of stud running backs early on in the draft. Another tip that I'll give you is especially if you're not drafting until if you're drafting the day before the season, it's a little bit different. If you're drafting like a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, you're watching this right away before the season starts, just don't draft the defense. Don't even draft the kicker. Let those 2 spots stay open until like the day before because at this point, things are going to get sketchy. Keep another positional guy on your team or a handcuff for one of your top running backs on your team. I don't really like handcuffs, but in this situation, keep them on there day before the season starts or the day of the season. Just drop that player and add a defense because God forbid, right? One of your top running backs, Joe Mixon, is done. He's done. He's opting out of the season. That comes out of nowhere, not because of a holdout, because of COVID, something like that, right? He has a kid. He doesn't want to take the risk. Whoever it might be, insert player's name here. Mark Andrews is done right now because he has diabetes. This is a true thing. He has diabetes and he's at risk of COVID. Those types of things, right? Might as well hold that extra player on your roster for the extra couple of weeks as a security blanket because what's the harm there? You can pick up any dusty old kicker. You should be streaming your defenses anyways. You should not be having 2 defenses on your team. That's just the worst way. Honestly, if you're in a good league, you've already convinced your league mates to get rid of the kicker and defense position, right? And also, last thing while you're drafting, always be sure of the guys around you who are drafting, what are their needs in the draft. If they've already loaded up on running back and you know they're probably not going to take a running back or they already took a 2 tight ends or 1 tight end and odds are they're not taking back-to-back tight ends, especially if they took one early on. If you're drafting next to them, you know that, let's just say you're picking 11th in the draft, you know that guy picking at the turn at the 12th and 13th pick, it can't snipe you at tight end because he already has his tight ends. Or he's probably not going to snipe you at running back because he needs wide receivers at this point. Or he hasn't taken a quarterback yet. Always be looking at ways that you can just kind of map out the next picks of your opponents or at least what they won't take so you can get a better edge. You can take that guy that you feel a little bit more comfortable with and let a couple of picks go by to take the guy that you're risking it to kind of wait on, right? But you're not as much risking it because you're doing your research on the guys around you. So I appreciate you tuning into this video. This is my number 1 draft strategy, kind of the flow that I'm going through drafts this year and getting a lot of success, at least how I feel comfortably. We'll find out if it's successful at the end, how my teams look. I think I'm getting very good teams the way that they're building out. So please do hit that like button. Big old subscribe button before you leave. If you enjoyed this content, please do leave a comment and let me know what you thought about it. Please do hit the like and subscribe button. You can check out my Supreme Draft Guide, just $10 because of Monkey Knife Fight. If you use the promo code SALNFL, SALNFL, you'll get $10 over on Monkey Knife Fight. It's linked down below. You also get $5 extra for free, a future ticket to a contest over there. It's a prop betting site. And then you get my Supreme Draft Guide totally free once you use $2 of your non-promotional balance. So be sure to check all of that out. The Supreme Draft Guide is loaded with a bunch of tools that are here just to help you. There's a playlist here on YouTube with over 100 videos now for the 2020 fantasy football season. Some of them might be outdated because, there's some player news that happens throughout the offseason. Most of them are not going to be, so be sure to check all those out. Thank you so much for tuning into this video. My name's Vetri, and I will see you all in the next one.